Hello everyone! Wait a minute, that's not my greeting. Anyway, welcome to an obviously not chemistry video about chess. I have enjoyed playing the game for quite some time despite my relative lack of ability. However, in late 2017, my joining the online platform Lichess clearly sparked massive growth in the game. Around the time I joined, roughly 15 million games were being played a month, and now it is closer to 90 million. Possibly dubious claims aside, something that has not changed through chess's recent rise in popularity is the value of the pieces in the game. But you say, the point of chess is to checkmate your opponent, not have more points than them. True, but the pieces also have the following standard values. The position on the board is from one of the most famous chess games ever. Simply known as the opera game, Paul Morphy and his opponents both have 10 pieces after 16 moves. One way to assess this position is to use the values and determine if either side has a material advantage. We see Morphy playing as white as 7 pawns, 1 bishop, 1 rook. That's good for 15 points. His opponents, on the other hand, have 5 pawns, 1 knight, 1 bishop, 1 rook, and 1 queen, which totals 25 points. Black currently has a plus 10 advantage, but what about the king, you ask? For argument's sake, let's give the king a value of 4. If we add 4 points for the white king, that reduces black's advantage to plus 6, but remember that black also has a king, and their advantage returns to 10. Now you know why the king is usually excluded. Black has the material advantage, but the game is more than just points because black is dead lost. So even though the values are not the sole determinant of a side's advantage, I'm still interested in whether they are at all reasonable. To do this, I'm only going to consider the following. Based on a piece's position on an open board, what square or squares can it move to? I only need these for discussing the pawn, but the board has coordinates which use the letters A to H for each column or file, and the numbers 1 through 8 for each row or rank. From its starting position on square A2, this pawn can move 1 forward or 2 forward. However, if it wants to capture, it can only move diagonal 1 to the right. So this pawn, also known as the A pawn, can move to 3 other squares from this position. Thanks to the symmetry of the board, I know that the pawn on the right, or the H pawn, has the same options. If we move to the second column and look at the so-called B pawn, it still can move 1 or 2 forward, but it can capture diagonally left or right. This gives the B pawn 4 options, and this is also true for the C, D, E, F, and G pawns. If the A pawn is not on its starting square, it can no longer utilize a 2-square move. It can either move forward 1 or capture diagonally 1. These two options are also the same for the H pawn. A pawn on B3 has an additional option because it can capture in 2 ways. This gives it 3 moves, and we find the same is true for the C, D, E, F, and G pawns. The options for the pawn on the 3rd rank are the same for the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. You will never find pawns in the 1st or 8th ranks on the board. White pawns start in the 2nd rank, and should one reach the 8th, it promotes to a knight, bishop, rook, or queen. This means pawns can be found on or influence 48 squares. Now to finally use the space on the right of the screen where I will keep track of the influence of each piece, which is simply the average of all the values on the board. The average influence of a pawn is 2.916 squares. The knight is considered a minor piece, but if you're learning the game, understanding its movements is anything but a minor task. This is because the knight's move is unique in 2 ways. First, it can move 2 squares in one direction, say up the board, and then 1 square to the left or right. It also jumps to its new position, so any piece along that path is not actually in the way. The first movement could also be to the right, down, or left, which means a knight in this position can move to 8 other squares. In fact, that's true for a knight anywhere in the middle 16 squares of the board. The closer a knight gets to the edge, though, the less influence it has. In this spot, just 1 above where it was before, it can only move to 6 other squares. Again, thanks to the symmetry of the board, it would be true in all of these as well. In those corners where you would think it would be 6 squares is actually only 4. Even at the edge of the board, there are certain squares where the knight can move to 4 others. Getting closer to the corner, the influence continues to decline. From this location and 7 others, the knight can only move to 3 other squares. The knight is least influential in the 4 corners where it can only go to 2 squares. The influence of the knight is unsurprisingly higher than the pawn and comes in at an average of 5.25 squares. The movement of the bishop is easy to understand as it must remain on its color the entire match. You might think this restriction makes it much worse than the knight. However, one advantage the bishop has is the ability to move clear across the board in one move. From the corner, that's 7 squares. You might think since the corner was the worst for the knight, it must be for the bishop too, but that's not correct. From this position, the bishop once again influences 7 squares. In fact, regardless of the exact square, the best a bishop can do from the edge of the board is move to 7 others. Should the bishop be on its longest diagonal, but 1 square closer to the center, it will influence 2 additional squares. This means any bishop 1 square from the edge can move to 9 others. Taking another step in, any bishop 2 squares from the edge has 11 options. Finally, the best place for the bishop is one of the squares in the center of the board where influence is the greatest at a lucky 13. A single bishop may not be able to touch every square like a knight, but it still influences more squares at an average of 8.75. We reach the rook, which has the most straightforward movements of any piece, literally. A rook's movement is simply up, down, left or right the maximum number of possible squares. Interestingly, this means the rook is the only piece that has a constant number of potential moves no matter its position on the board, 14. This also makes it easiest to calculate the average influence at 14 squares. We have reached what most people, even those unfamiliar with the game, recognize as the strongest piece, the queen. It moves like a bishop and rook combined, so it can go left, right, up, down, and diagonally as many squares as desired. This means the worst position for a queen is the same for that as a bishop, the edge of the board, where she influences 21 squares. Again, like the bishop, the queen's influence grows by 2 squares as she moves towards the center of the board. That means 1 square in, her influence is 23 squares. Moving another step closer to the center, the queen now influences 25 squares. This means her maximum influence is in the very center, where she can move to one of 27 other squares. A queen's reputation as the strongest piece in the game is verified, at least initially, with an average influence of 22.75 squares. Since the previous influences were determined on potential moves, it is possible to do the same thing for the king. The movement of the king is very simple, 1 square in any direction. This means in the corners it can only move to 3 other squares. When on the edge of the board, the king has access to 2 additional squares, raising its influence to 5. However, on any square but the edge, the king can move to any of the neighboring squares. This is the best the king can do with the 8 potential options. With all positions considered, the king influences an average of just over 6.5 squares. I have everything in average squares, but it's easy to fix that. With pawns valued as 1, I can divide all the averages by that of the pawn, and here are the results. So does such a rudimentary calculation of influence have any relevance to the standard values? For starters, I got the value of the pawn correct by default.
Default! Woohoo!
The bishop is surprisingly spot on. The rook and queen both fairly close to the standard. The king, of course, does not have a value, but 2.25 falls within the range of values given by individuals whose systems analyze the king's attacking and defending potential. Unfortunately, for all the relative good of those 5 pieces, this valuation falls seriously short with respect to the knight. The influence values the bishop approximately 65% more than the knight, while the standards consider them equal. Anyone who's played the game may recognize my valuation's flaws, however valuing the bishop more than the knight is quite an old idea. In the early 1800s, Jacob Surratt wrote as perhaps the first piece value system, but not with numbers as we use today. Though he considers the bishop and knight to be equal, in 23 considered situations, the bishop is preferred to the knight in 12 of them, giving it a slight advantage. Value systems help rationalize the power of each piece and are especially useful when considering exchanging pieces, particularly rooks, knights, and bishops. Using influence values, exchanging a rook for 2 knights is a bad idea because the rook is more influential than both of them. However, trading a rook for a bishop and knight is about equal. But if there is a chance to exchange a rook for 2 bishops, jump on the chance immediately. The standards paint a very different but straightforward picture. Exchanging a rook for 2 pieces is a great decision every time because on points it is always in your favor. If you don't trust a player from the 1800s or an upper lower middle ELO player from the 2020s, then I submit Alpha Zero's values, which were determined through an analysis of its games. This reveals the value of the bishop roughly 10% greater than that of the knight. The neural network also agrees with the idea that exchanging a rook for 2 pieces is favorable. My original question concerned whether the standard values were reasonable, and clearly they still are. Being easy to use whole numbers, the standard values provide a simple guide which encapsulates much more than potential movements on an open board. And thank goodness for that, as it makes chess way more evergreen, don't you think? So will this analysis, flaws and all, add much to the discussion or end up in the hallowed digital halls of Wikipedia? Probably not, but I enjoyed giving it a go anyway. If anyone takes this a bit further, I'd love to see where it goes. But if you simply prefer to enjoy the game, head over to Oggenmotter's chess channel and become an excellent subscriber for all your chess needs. Perhaps between his videos, we will meet online and I will blunder my pieces as usual, but until that day, thank you very much for watching.